Hi, this is the Social Jello with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Jello with Angelo show.
Welcome to another episode of Social Jello with Angelo. As you saw in the title, this is Kajukenbo versus Jeet Kune Do, Hollywood Myths Debunked. A lot of people say that Bruce Lee never even sparred. So real quick, let's take a look at that claim right now. So here we have Bruce Lee sparring, Jeet Kune Do. I know we said Jeet Kune Do versus Kajukenbo, but I couldn't find any footage of Jeet Kune Do versus Kajukenbo. But this is the only known footage of Bruce Lee sparring. And this is back in the 1960s. As you can see, he's got open finger gloves. You know, it's not, compared to modern MMA, anybody watching this now would look at this and wouldn't see it as being that groundbreaking, right? It's, you know, you have a takedown, a quick little, like almost like a karate shot, and that was Bruce Lee doing that. They both have helmets on. And this is at Ed Parker Kempo's tournament. So that's what it is. That's what it was. Would it be versus Kajukenbo? Versus Kajukenbo. Well, let's take a look. And then here's Kajukenbo sparring. You know, why is this not considered MMA sparring? Why am I calling this Kajukenbo sparring? Well, I'm a Kajukenbo practitioner. My student's a Kajukenbo practitioner. As you can see, very informal. I'm wearing street clothes. And you know, there's a ground and pound. Limited rules. Fish hooks are allowed for those of you watching. There's very limited rules. 12-6 elbows are allowed. Kneeing on the ground is allowed, even though I'm not doing that at the moment. So that's what makes the difference between Kajukenbo and MMA sparring. It's light, as you can see. I'm not bashing my student into a bloody pulp, but that's what's going on. So now you kind of got a quick taste of what Jeet Kune Do looks like and what Kajukenbo looks like. Well, not really. And that's why we have to have a whole podcast to discuss this. If it was that simple, our video would be done. And I wouldn't be talking to Pat Griffith. Thank you for joining us, Pat, who's coming out of California. He's representing Jeet Kune Do. He's a Jeet Kune Do instructor, as well as a Kajukenbo instructor. So he's got a good view on both styles. And then we have Onel coming out of Puerto Rico, who's also a Kajukenbo practitioner and has a background in MMA, and he's a retired MMA fighter. And me, Angelo. Hi, nice to meet you if this is your first podcast. I am a Kajukenbo practitioner, MMA coach, and a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so that's the background I come from. But the biggest issue in all of this, I titled this Kajukenbo versus Jeet Kune Do. The biggest issue is trying to pull apart these arts. What is Jeet Kune Do? What is Kajukenbo? We're not going to go that deep into that because there's a whole other podcast I did about Kajukenbo. You can see it here. But we are going to be focusing a little more on Jeet Kune Do today as far as an analysis of what this is. Like, what is going on with Jeet Kune Do, and how are these portrayed in Hollywood movies? Because so far, what I showed you in both situations is not what's happening in Hollywood. Well, you're not going to find Kajukenbo in Hollywood. Oh, I shouldn't say that so soon. Before I say you're not going to find Kajukenbo in Hollywood, you actually can find some practitioners that did Kajukenbo. For example, Benny Rodriguez instructed.
Hora, 8:24 de la noche. Para escuchar las notificaciones.
One. So it is and it wasn't. Benny Rodriguez's instructor did have a questionable Kajukenbo background. And if you don't know who Benny Rodriguez is, he's the kickboxer in one of the Jackie Chan movies where he's fighting like a kickboxer, and he's in that movie. You can look it up. You can Google that. I don't want to Google that because I don't want any copyright issues. So in the background of Hollywood, Kajukenbo is kind of there, but Jeet Kune Do is way up in the forefront. So if we're doing a little tally of points of what's more popular, Jeet Kune Do is in the forefront. I can find Jeet Kune Do way easier in movies because of Bruce Lee. And there's a whole podcast I did about Jeet Kune Do being a Hollywood art. You can follow that tag here. And Pat and another Jeet Kune Do expert were on that show talking about that. But today we're going to be focusing a little more on what's going on with Kajukenbo and how that's compared to Jeet Kune Do as far as Hollywood's concerned. So we're just going to grab this and pass this on to Pat. How does that work? What is that connection between Hollywood, Kajukenbo, and Jeet Kune Do?
Well, first I'll start just for a second with Jeet Kune Do. Just to make it simple. With Hollywood and Jeet Kune Do, one thing I'll say is we said before, they're similar yet different. And one thing I'll say how it's different is you take Bruce Lee, and people understand there was the actor and the martial artist. And one thing I'll say is, for example, even his voice, like what is synonymous to Bruce Lee? What? And all the scream, what? He never did that in real life. When he trained. I never heard anybody say he made those voices. Okay. With Kajukenbo, there are a few people like Mark Dacascos that was in the movie with Keanu Reeves. Just went blank on the name of the movie all of a sudden. But, one thing that's, I think Kajukenbo is a negative connotation, sometimes from some of the things like Fight Quest that came out that were edited to make Kajukenbo not be as real as what it really is. Kajukenbo, we talk about as a street-oriented art, but some things that people don't understand that Jeet Kune Do and Kajukenbo have in similarities is, first of all, kind of the foundational arts that came with it. Okay, if you talk first about Kajukenbo, you talk about Kajukenbo. Well, as you talked about, Mitch Powell, really the first three main arts in Kajukenbo were judo, jiu-jitsu, and boxing, which are three of the most stable martial arts in MMA today. Now you take Jeet Kune Do, the three first arts that Bruce did were fencing, Wing Chun, and boxing. So boxing is the interlacing arts, and because they're both street-oriented arts. They're also very similar in time. Kajukenbo was from 47 to 49 was being made, trying to make it street-oriented. 5 guys came together, made Kajukenbo. Bruce Lee did the same thing from 65 to 67. Later on, Bruce started figuring out that, hey, judo, jiu-jitsu were important as well. So those became a staple of his arts as well. So a lot of the arts that were made, that were basically put together, that were known as being effective for the streets, were put into Jeet Kune Do and into Kajukenbo. That's why they're both effective. And actually, a lot of people who do Kajukenbo do Jeet Kune Do and vice versa now. I know quite a few people that are high-ranking in both. So there's a lot of interlacing. I think one thing that people have the misconception of Kajukenbo from YouTube and everything of that nature is, I remember somebody saying one time to me that Kajukenbo was Kempo with 2 or 3 throws. Well, again, Kempo wasn't a staple at first in Kajukenbo. That took a few years till Emperada, if you recall, started training with Chow. But first he was a boxer and jiu-jitsu guy. Okay, so to make it like it was just Kempo, they threw a few throws in. Well, really the staple was boxing and judo jiu-jitsu. So if you take that and you go, okay, what's the difference? Well, the problem is nowadays most people take one section of Kajukenbo, which is the Kempo part, which is good, and they forget about all the other aspects. I'll give you an example. Your teacher, Professor Ronnie Izagiri, is a Kajukenbo practitioner, but he's also a wushu, which is the bow part, Chinese boxing or boxing. I remember one time he was talking to somebody, he talked about, it was an MMA gentleman that was going to go to his first Kajukenbo tournament, the KSDI International Tournament in Vegas. He said, you're never going to see this anywhere else. And the guy said, what do you mean? And Ronnie said, you walk to this side of the ring, you're going to see jiu-jitsu. Okay, you go to this side, you're going to see stick fighting, Kali Eskrima Arnis. If you go to this side, you're going to see point sparring. This side, continuous sparring. This side, it's a lot of different cultures, Chinese, Japanese, hard, soft, all put into one art. That's what makes Kajukenbo effective, but people only focus on the basic Kempo with 2 or 3 throws. They don't put all the Kajukenbo together, and that's one thing I think it's a falsehood, especially in YouTube and in movies. They only do like the bam, bam, and then there's a takedown, and that's it. Way more than that. So,
yeah, and then just to kind of just to give the listeners and viewers a quick rundown of a little bit of Kajukenbo, you will find, you are right, Mark Dacascos in movies like Only the Strong, Brotherhood of the Wolf, Crying Freeman, John Wick 3, I'm not going to mention Iron Chef. He was there, but he didn't fight anyone. I hope, but maybe he did. I don't know. I don't think he fought anyone on the Iron Chef. But Cradle to the Grave. So he, Mark Dacascos, who's Aldo Coscos' son, has been in a lot of different movies and has displayed a type of Kajukenbo that is very Kung Fu Kempo oriented, like you just said. And it's again made for the movies. We can say the same thing about Jeet Kune Do. Even the Jeet Kune Do is very flashy for the movies. So you can't really use that as a barometer of what's happening in the art. And then the other thing is then if you just Google it, as we just saw off camera, how long it took me to find something. I had to dig into my own videos to show you something, because if I showed you, if you Google Kajukenbo, I'll just be honest, you're going to see a lot of point sparring, a lot of Kempo point sparring, not even karate, because I've shown them to karate guys, and karate guys are like, that's not karate point sparring. So it's a very specific type of point sparring. It's that USA point sparring. And some people would think that that's Kajukenbo. If you Google it, that's what you're going to, the majority of what we just saw off camera was that. And I didn't want to show you that because I don't think that doesn't look anything like what I just showed you. But maybe a lot of Kajukenbo guys right now are in the comments arguing that what I just showed you is in Kajukenbo. And that's a total different bag that I'm not going to go under. But I will say this, going over to Onel, when you got into MMA out in Puerto Rico, how much of your Kajukenbo did you use in the cage?
First of all, I do a couple of fights that I don't consider it a career. When I was younger, and to do the history completely of the timeline, I was cross training Okinawa Kempo Karate Do at that moment, and Kajukenbo at the same time, and I use a lot. I use a lot. Uh, in those times, the training was a lot different that it's nowadays in Kajukenbo and in MMA in the island. I'm talking about here, Puerto Rico. Not talking about U.S. or in Puerto Rico was a lot different. And in those times, I was working with the PRKA, which is Ortega's father organization in the 90s, and it was very old school, very physical. So it prepares me a lot to be on a cage to support the rules of those type of fightings, because that time I remember was with Pride Association, and the guys that know Pride and the rules in 90s and early 2000 was very few rules. It's not the same MMA that is today. I'm in contact with guys from MMA, professional fighters here in the island, and others amateurs, and I have seen a really big change on the rules, you know. But answering your question, I definitely was ready for it. Just only like I was training in those days.
And did,
We only add a little more karate kicks and endurance trainings from the system of karate, and change a little with more grounding work to be able to be more complete in order to compete in those days. But physically and mentally and in terms of the movement and basic movements and stuff, I was ready for it. Only with
and did they allow stomping on the ground in the venue that you're at?
yeah, even today you cannot hit with the heels on the back part. You cannot use the elbows on those times. Yes, to do it. It was the
Okay.
early days from
Okay.
MMA,
All right.
so it was a lot different.
And then just to cover that, like I recently had a conversation with UFC coach John Hacklam about the 12-6 elbow. They recently brought that back into the UFC, but they pulled it out a while back, and there's a whole story that he talks about for that. But
Even the ground pounding today, when you go in in the fights with MMA, if the fighter doesn't respond correctly or get out quick, get stopped. Early days, that wasn't happening. Or you get knocked down, or you ping, or something is gonna get broke. No, no, they don't. Those days they don't give you the rule of ground and pound.
okay,
So it's a lot different today than the older days, you know,
okay. So
in the aspect of MMA.
so going back to this comparison that we're doing, so far we've talked a lot about what Kajukenbo looks like, and I couldn't find, and that now we're having very similar issues. I can't find a lot of. I can find a lot of Jeet Kune Do sparring, but I'm going to find a lot of the same. Like I'm going to have a lot of the same issues. I already did before I. That's why we were kind of running late in production today. I was trying to find some more background information on Jeet Kune Do sparring, and I came across the same issue where it was just like all over the board between really bad, like I don't want to represent the art that way. I didn't want to use the video, and and then maybe a little too good, a little too choreographed, a lot of Hollywood stuff. And I really couldn't. And I know it's not that because I'm not a Jeet Kune Do guy, but I have showed up to Pat's school and I've seen what he teaches, and it wasn't that. It definitely wasn't that. I didn't find that online. Majority of the stuff I found were a lot of what I would call Bruce Lee impersonators. Um, so, Pat, what briefly does Jeet Kune Do sparring look like, for example?
Well, actually, when you showed that thing with Bruce Lee, I do have to say one thing about that, which I've never seen anybody ever say. So I'm going to throw this out there. Two things. One, Danny DeSanto, Bruce Lee's student, said that Bruce sparred very much like a Mexican fighter, brawler, banger. In that video, you notice he didn't do that. I'll show you why. And I've never seen this anywhere, so I'm going to throw this out. What does Jeet Kune Do mean? Jeet Kune Do, way of intercepting fist. If you look at every technique there, he hit the guy when the guy was coming in to hit him. All Bruce was showing there was the intercept, to time the guy. If you notice, he'd walk around, pop, all of a sudden he'd hit him. So that whole video isn't really sparring. It's Bruce demonstrating, I can intercept you. Anytime I feel you coming, I'm going to hit you or kick you. And that's why he did the takedown, the Sotogari. He did the Sotogari because after he hit him, he went to the side, then he swept him. So that's what that was. A lot of Jeet Kune Do sparring is what they do is they talk about distance. You've got kicking and ranges, and they basically talk about kicking range, punching range, elbow range, grappling with the trapping. Okay, so basically 4 ranges: kicking, punching, elbows, the trapping, and grappling. Okay, so what they do is they do basically sparring for each range. And sometimes the problem with Jeet Kune Do is they don't put it together. They'll do their kickboxing, they'll do their boxing, they'll do their clinch and Muay Thai type of stuff, and then they'll do their takedowns. But a lot of times they don't put it together. If they do, then it pretty much looks just like MMA, and that's what happens. That's what Bruce, like some people say, is the godfather of MMA because he was putting all those ranges together. They call it also the measure, the fighting measure. So a lot of times it's almost choreographed in the aspect of, I tell you, okay, you're going to be defense, I'm going to be offense. But we still know what's going to happen, but we want to keep it controlled a lot of times to get those ranges, and then they mesh them together. I notice a lot of times on YouTube, they don't mesh them together. They talk about, okay, now you're going to be, I'm defense, you're offense. I'm just kicking, you're just punching, switch it up. They're doing drills kind of, which we all do in different arts, whether it's jiu-jitsu or whatever, but they're not putting it all together. That's what I notice in the internet world is they're not combining everything.
So this is kind of the same issue I'm seeing. I always tell people that, I always tell my students, because they'll look up Kajukenbo online, and I tell them, be careful of that, because you're just going to find a lot of Kakukenbo. Like, there's no jujitsu. And you briefly mentioned jujitsu in the history of Kajukenbo, but what ends up happening is it's not really jujitsu. I'll just be honest. It's not what the public is calling jujitsu. They're talking about Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Let's just be really straightforward here. And Brazilian jiu-jitsu looks nothing like the old Japanese jiu-jitsu. That's more bullshido Aikido based. I'll just say it. I'm not going to try to hide it from you. I'm sorry. Aikido has a huge bullshido element to it. And if you're an Aikido practitioner, I'm sorry for saying that to you, but that's the art that's being picked on the most by the internet is Aikido for not having sparring. That's really the issue. Is the internet is really exposing a lot of fake martial artists out there. And not to say that Aikido is not a real art. It is a real art. There's nothing to, but there's also a lot of just shams. Like a lot of people doing the whole waving of the hand, and someone falls over. They don't even no touch stuff. Mostly coming from Aikido, and mostly coming from quote unquote Japanese jiu-jitsu. And they're Japanese. I'm out here in Japan, and I see the videos they post, and there's a lot of that no touch shit happening. We're like, oh, I wave my hand, the guy has a heart attack. Right? It's like, and Japan can do that because it's not a violent society, so they're not going to have to worry about what are their guys doing the hoo 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 and then going outside and getting jumped. It's just not going to happen. It's very rare that violence occurs on the street. Not that it's happening all the time in America, but there's going to be more of a pressure test. In the U.S., there's more of a pressure test happening. So that being said, that's what you just mentioned about, well, the issue about Jeet Kune Do is a lot of the practitioners are showing only one part of the art. I'll argue that in Kajukenbo, very similar, a lot of the content out there is only showing you one part of the art. It's not really showing you the whole thing. And that's kind of the, it looks like that's a similar vein that we're hitting on both arts, which is why right now the internet's kind of looking at both arts like, maybe they are bullshido, right? Because they're not seeing enough. And then we have to bring up, then everyone gets their, everyone gets all mad when people say that, but then we have to bring up their fighters. And both arts, we can say Jeet Kune Do. All right, so we'll just do a quick list real quick. I'll name a guy, Onel will name a guy, and you name a guy. I'll name one Kajukenbo UFC fighter, Onel will name another Kajukenbo UFC fighter, and then Pat, you're gonna name two Jeet Kune Do fighters, UFC fighters. So here we go. Chuck Liddell. Hi, Onel.
Glover Teixeira.
Glover Teixeira. All right, Pat for Jeet Kune Do. Just two.
Cub Swanson, Josh Barnett.
There you go. So we can name UFC fighters from each style, but not. I'll tell you right now, those bullshido arts I mentioned earlier cannot do that. I will say that in defense to both Jeet Kune Do and Kajukenbo, is Aikido. You don't hear it. You don't see no UFC fighters with a background in Aikido. Now they will. You'll find Steven Seagal showing some Hollywood. Back to Hollywood. Doing some Hollywood thing with a UFC fighter, and the UFC fighter kind of just nods his head and say, yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Uncle Steve, for showing me that, right? But at the end of the day, you don't have anyone whose base art was Aikido. As we get to the wrap-up here, there's some things that we want you to have a deeper understanding of what's happening here. And one of the key takeaways, I would say, is Kajukenbo is different from Jeet Kune Do because it does have a very well-established belt system. Mm-hmm. And then I think Jeet Kune Do does not. And then I'm just going to hand that over to you because you know more about Jeet Kune Do than I do. Not to say that this is better. I'm going to be very, very, very careful by wording here. I'm not saying Kajukenbo is better for this. I'm just telling you ways to distinguish the two arts from each other is that Kajukenbo has a very set of a belt system with colors from white to black that Jeet Kune Do may or may not have. The other key difference is that Kajukenbo has less of a following, a smaller following than Jeet Kune Do does. But as far as what it looks like in application, it's taught and practiced differently. Pat.
First thing I'm going to say is you were talking about with the videos. And one thing I'll say is a lot of people that are posting are younger. They're students. In both arts, and think about this, when all the top people in Kajukenbo, everybody from, and I can name quite a few senior grandmasters right now, Senior Grandmaster Rick Kinji, Gary Forbach, Ron Pierce, Tetzatello, Tony Bowles, some of them aren't here anymore. And back then, the internet wasn't there. Those people didn't post anything. And I'm not saying anything bad about, any of the Kajukenbo's people, But I'm not saying they're second stringers either. Please don't take it that way. But some of the top people that were there 20, 30, 40 years ago, there's nothing out there. Same thing with Jeet Kune Do. If you look at a lot of Bruce Lee's students, there's not a lot of video out there of any of his students. I mean, they might be instructing, but I'm talking about really doing stuff, not much. It's a lot of times wannabes, people that see a Bruce Lee video, or people, oh, look, and they go, oh, yeah, I'm going to go, and they learn 3 movements. I'm Bruce Leroy from Last Dragon or whatever. So that's the first thing I want to say is there's a lot of times the first stringers aren't posting. It could also be because they don't want to share their stuff. Because especially in Jeet Kune Do, like you said, the difference between Kajukenbo, it is, I won't say, Jeet Kune Do has basically 5 levels of teaching. You have apprentice instructor, assistant, full, senior, and then now they call legend. But those are only with Danny Nozanto's group, but there are levels, but I would say there's only a few of Bruce's students that actually ever opened up schools, like Richard Bastillo and Danny Nozanto. So a lot of them were in the garage type of thing, so they didn't even think about, per se, rank, okay? So because of that, I would say it's more organized because Kajukenbo was more, Jeet Kune Do is kind of segmented. Each guy kind of did his own thing. It was his version of Jeet Kune Do, and I'm really simplifying this, but it's like each guy had their own thing. So if you say, Bruce had, let's say, 50 people he really taught to, let's just say in his teaching career, each one did their own thing. So there wasn't like a set organization. Still to this day, there really was never a set organization like KSDI and Kajukenbo or KOA or the Board of Advisors, nothing like that in Jeet Kune Do. That's the big difference. So there are rankings, but it's not as organized because there's no board of advisors or a set group that says, okay, here's the parameters to get ABC. That's the big difference that I know of.
And then in the wrap up, Onel,
Yes.
what would you say is a distinguishing factor between Kajukenbo and what you've seen out of Jeet Kune Do?
Okay. First of all, I'm gonna mix a little bit of things. We gotta be one topic very, very, very certainly, and it's when you see Hollywood, you're gonna see almost every style over there in Hollywood looks almost the same choreography. Pay attention. The only thing they do is if the movie is Chinese based, they add a little Chinese flavor, but look the movement. The movement are the same. So what I want to say is what you see in the movies from the martial art is the American perspective from the culture of the system, from the culture of the persons, but they don't use the system like it is. They make a mix. So, with that being said, I'm gonna say something that probably is gonna it's gonna not being well received by the martial art community in general.
Don't worry, I
But
do that all the time. It's just you can say it. Don't worry.
so we have another thing that we have to have in perspective is generations, and the psychology from each generation will affect the martial arts. What's happening with Jeet Kune Do is happening already in Kajukenbo, it's happening already in other systems. And the thing is pretty simple. It's pretty simple. The society is not as strong as the 1940s. Uh, for example, if we go to Hawaii, Hawaii was preparing for a war with during 1940s to the end of the 40s, which is Second World War. And hard times create hard people. Today, you don't find something in internet that looks like Kajukenbo sparring, and you will not find it because very few are doing it, and they don't like to post it because they're gonna get criticized and pinch over with a community of persons that probably doesn't have the material like it is or the whole information that they are gods because they got a lot of rank, a lot of students, big organizations and stuff. All these things affects us. I got sparring with my students where I get my broken nose, broken lip, uh, 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 almost broke an elbow. And not 10 years ago, this summer in August, in preparation for certain tournaments that I was gonna do, the sparring was really strong. Even though at certain times we use the protection gears, you know. But the other thing is, not every practitioner look in the past of his system, and this is going to affect a lot the legacy of the system. Why? Because if you are just looking for a curriculum, you're not looking how the teacher from your teacher from your teacher from your teacher until founders, a lot of perspective. Every time you pass a knowledge to a student, you keep something for yourself in purpose or not in purpose. You're human beings. Certain times we forget to tell the student, oh, this part, this part, this part. And when probably you never remember in life that you didn't pass that information to your students. So what I'm telling is that from the founders of the system through nowadays has been a loss of knowledge, a lot of loss in training. The perspective has changed a lot, and nowadays people like more the Hollywood oriented stuff because it's easier. It's easier. I was having a conversation. I guess what today and yesterday with two different of my students, and we're talking about the campus sections of the Kajukenbo and how to follow through through Japan the lineage of those Kempo masters. And when you see books like I have it here, let me show. So give me a second. What is self-defense? From James Mitosik, for an example. And when you see cultural practitioners from today, they don't hit the makiwara, they don't do breakings, they barely do conditionings. But when you see this book, you will see James Mitose hitting the makiwara and talking about the routines in the makiwara. You will see a part of his techniques, and you will be amazed how much they look like the Kajukenbo old school techniques. So what I'm saying, every system from Kung Fu to Karate, Kajukenbo, Jiu-Jitsu, the Japanese one, and I'm not talking about Aikido, I'm talking about Jiu-Jitsu. Aikido is one thing, and Jiu-Jitsu is another thing. When you follow the line from BJJ, it came from Jiu-Jitsu, not from Aikido, from Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. So you're gonna see some marks, some red flags that you will see same type of training with a little different flavor by the culture and different systems. And those are spiritual areas, endurance, body conditioning, breakings, and other type of stuff that majority today doesn't want to work out and doesn't understand that. For example, why you do breakings? It's not to compete. It's not to compete. It's to test the strength that you have in different frames of body, and to help you control the damage that you're gonna make a body, in order to you know the amount of force and the possible
And I'm
damage
just
that you're gonna make to the
and,
opponent.
and I'm just going to interject real quick. I brought this up to John Hackelman, who's Chuck Liddell's coach, because he actually talked about breaking boards, and I don't like it. I don't like breakboarding. I think it's bullshit. I'll tell you that right now. Now, but hold on a second. But what surprised me was Hackelman, his UFC coach, John Hackelman. When I told him that, he said that he likes to have his kids breaking stuff because when you hit a hard surface like a face without gloves on, it's a different impact than when you're wearing gloves. Now, he also said, I don't have my adults do it because of the stigmatization of breaking, right? When you go online, all the people are breaking, and there's like a whole segment of martial arts when it comes to breaking that can seem very fake. Now, however, that to the side, he did have a good point. Like I never thought about it that way. When he put it in that framework, he said, you know, for adults it's kind of difficult because adults have different goals. But he said specifically for kids, it gives them a clear achievement to be made, and he's seen the difference it makes in kids when they actually accomplish it, right? Because it's a very clear set goal. Can you break this? Can you break that? And it gives the kids a sense of confidence that he's seen an improvement in. And he likes the idea that it prepares the kids to make a proper fist if they're going to hit something without gloves on. He said there's a self-defense element that he really likes. So he changed my mind. He changed my mind on it. Like and why did I interject? Because anybody listening right now might have been rolling their eyes the way I used to roll my eyes when I used to hear Papa talking about breaking. But we are out of time.
Me too.
We are out of time. So I gotta cut us short here on this one. But to the person watching this podcast, hopefully you can kind of see, even between me and Onel, we're all three of us are Kajukenbo practitioners. All three of us have similar and different applications. Obviously, Pat is a Jeet Kune Do guy, and he's integrating that into his Kajukenbo. So, if anything, when you're watching this podcast, you're listening to this podcast, we encourage you to, you know, look up the different places that if you're thinking of practicing either one of these arts, just check out what they're doing and check out your local classes online and see if you enjoy what you see, and then enjoy what you're doing at the class. And does it match your goals? I can't speak for Jeet Kune Do on this side. I'll let Pat speak for Jeet Kune Do, but I'll just speak for Kajukenbo real quick. Kajukenbo schools vary in what they're showing and what they're practicing. And it really just comes down to you, the listener, watcher, what your goals are. If your goals are to fight in the UFC, then find a Kajukenbo school that's more MMA oriented. If your goals are the good thing is if your goal is self-defense, Kajukenbo has you more or less covered in a lot of these areas. But if your goal is to be a combat sport, then you're going to have to dig a little deeper to make sure that the program you go into covers the combat sport that you want to get into, whatever that is. Pat, Jeet Kune Do, what are your recommendations for someone looking for Jeet Kune Do?
Kind of what you said. It's what the person wants. You have to, because every Jeet Kune Do is different, just like a Kajukenbo school. Like my Kajukenbo was a harder physical getting beat on than my Jeet Kune Do, for example. That's just me. But it depends. You need to investigate, because there's some great Jeet Kune Do people out there, and there's some of Bruce Lee's people that are still alive, and there's some people that I think never have taken a class. So just like with Kajukenbo, I know people that tell me they're the great grand ultimate supreme master of Kajukenbo, and I'm like, wow, I've never seen you in 30 years. And I've been hanging around for 30 plus years with all these guys, and I've never seen you. So I'm not saying they're good or bad, but you got to see what fits you, your personality, and what you have to make kind of a note. What do I want to learn? Why am I here? and then find the school that answers those questions for you. That's really all it is. Any art, whether it's jiu-jitsu, whatever.
So finally, to you, the viewer, listener, I urge you to jump in. If you're a Kajukenbo guy or a Jeet Kune Do guy, share your experiences, because that's the best way we can get this out there. So if you're a Kajukenbo, this is only 3 of us, but this is the internet. So if you're one of the, I usually get anywhere between 50 to 3,000 views on a video like this. So at least 50 of you saw this. Jump in there, talk about the style you practice, and does any of this resonate with you, or has your experience been totally different? Go in the comments and let us know, because that's the best way to let everyone else know who's not a martial artist, who's wondering how to pull this apart. This is the best way to do it. If you can't share it through footage, well, share it through your words and share your experiences so that you can do a better contrast and comparison in that. That's my urge to action to you guys and girls who are watching this, and maybe we said things that you agree or disagree with. Put it out there, because that's going to give more people more information to be able to make this whole Kajukenbo versus Jeet Kune Do Hollywood myth debunked conversation a little more clear for everyone. Onel, thank you very much for coming out. Pat, thank you very much for coming out. And thank you very much for listening and watching to my viewers of the Social Dilemma with Angelo podcast. One of these once a week. Share and like with your friends and subscribe, and we'll catch you all next time.